So here's my old rear crank seal. It's still on here. I'm gonna have to pry it out of there. It's not leaking or anything, but while I'm in here, why not change it? I got a brand new one right here, and the part number for it is 91214. There you go, you can see it. Now, I believe section 7-18 gives you the instructions on how to remove this and change it. I'm just going to try to pry it out there and put the new one in carefully. If I have a socket big enough to tap it in gently, that's what I'll use, or I will have to improvise and find a can or something. Okay. So what I did to get the old seal out is I took a removal tool like this and just wedged it in there and then pried out, and it popped out. It was still a good seal, but it was getting a little crispy around the edges here, and after I did that, it's certainly not a good seal anymore. So yeah, so I'll put the new one on. So you want this to be clean and dry, so a little bit of oil down here. I'm gonna get that out of there. Just clean it up and dry it up really well. Then they want you to put a light coat of oil around this and on the inside of the seal, and then you're supposed to take a driver and hammer it on, tap it on lightly, and then take a feeler gauge and make sure that it's completely even all the way around. In other words, it's not tilted anyway, sticking out more over here or over here. So once you do that, it should be good. So, and you'll know you pushed it in all the way when it bottoms out on that lip in there. So new seal's in. I was able to just push it in by hand and it seated nicely. There was a little bit of resistance, but nothing too bad. But it's seated all the way around. I'll check it with a feeler gauge just to be safe. But I'm like 100% sure it's seated in there. Okay. So I was wrong. It was not seated all the way. I found this handy oil filter socket which fits perfectly over it, and I was able to tap it down to where it was flush. So now it's bottomed out. Before it was not. I was second guessing myself looking at it, and I remembered that when I pulled the other one out, it was flush, and this one wasn't quite. So now it is, and I am going to check it with a feeler gauge again just to be sure and tap accordingly with this and a hammer if need be. Alright, I'm getting ready to put on the flywheel. This is the bearing that goes in the flywheel. I got it from Napa. And there's the part number for it. It's an oddball size. So I had made a mark on my flywheel, but somehow it got taken off. But there is a mark on the flywheel right there, that little arrow triangle, and they want you to line up your mid plate mark with that. So you put it right in line with that arrow. In order to get this flywheel bearing out, just hit it from the other side with a socket. It falls out the back end, and you can hit it back in with a brass punch, or in my case I used, I think, a 25 mil socket and a hammer and just tapped it in lightly. When you're done, you just want to make sure that the inner race is turning smoothly. So I believe I may have lost my top dead center a little bit. This was turned more like that. I think when I put it back this direction, I think that's the way I took it off. That would make the most sense anyway, because if I was top dead center, I'm assuming that they would have this mark with top dead center, but I don't know. Anyway, they want you to put what's called a ring lock gear here. It's a special tool from Honda. I'm sure they sell something similar at AutoZone or whatever. What I do is I just take a big flathead screwdriver or a pry bar, put it on the ground, put it up here, and stick it into the teeth so that when you turn these and torque these and it's turning this clockwise, it'll push down on the screwdriver and transfer the weight to the ground and hopefully keep the flywheel from spinning so that you don't lose top dead center. Okay, so I got all this torqued down. Again, it's 76 foot-pounds. This one, 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and I believe it goes to 10 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 7 o'clock. Now, I tried putting a flathead down here, straight down to the ground. It wasn't really working, but I found this 90-degree guy here, and I just wedged him up against that nut, and that's working fine. So I'll leave this here for the entirety of the process. The next step is to wipe down any grease or oily fingerprints in this, because you don't want it contaminating your clutch disc, which I'm going to open up right now, then display the part number and put the clutch alignment tool on and stick it in there. Alright, so now that you've wiped that down and make sure it's free of any oils, debris, this is the part number you want for the first clutch disc. This is the flywheel side one. So it goes oriented like this. This one says mid side, and if you flip it over, it's stamped flywheel side. Pretty foolproof. And what you do is you take your clutch alignment tool and you put it in there like so, and like that. Okay? And this is just a note to myself that you do not put in the alignment tool yet. First you have to line up this triangle with the flywheel triangle, and the posts will line up accordingly, and you put that on. Then you put your clutch alignment tool on after. So now you have your arrows lined up, and you've taken off any oil on any of these surface areas on the mid disc on both the front and the rear of it. This is the part number for your outer clutch disc. That one goes on the outside of the mid plate and in between the mid plate and the pressure plate. It'll actually be oriented like this, where it says transmission side facing out and mid side facing in. So now I have both clutches aligned, the alignment tool just holding them in there. The triangle for the flywheel is lined up with the triangle for the mid plate, and there's another triangle right here on the pressure plate, and that will go in line. And before you put that on, you have to install your throwout bearing. Here's the part number for the throwout bearing. You need to pack some areas with high heat Ura grease on the throwout bearing, and this is what you'll need right here. Super high temp Ura grease. So you want to pack this inner area right here. There's a little groove. You want to pack that with grease. Then you want to install the throwout bearing so that that lower groove has these pressure plate forks, fingers, whatever you want to call them, sitting in the groove. Then you line up your triangles between the pressure plate and the mid plate. So the flywheel bolts were 17 mil 12 point. The pressure plate bolts are 10 mil 12 point. They're 16 foot-pounds, and this is the sequence you do them in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's it. Now, this throwout bearing makes contact behind the fork down there. So I'm going to put a little bit of grease on this where it makes contact. The last step before putting the transmission housing on and greasing up this is initializing the mid plate. And I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but I'm going to find out and tell you guys. I'm using this stuff on the spline right there and inside there. So I'm to the part where I'm doing this mid-plate guide initialization, and if you're doing this, you've probably downloaded the manual from online rather than spending $1,000 on an NSX book. So you're like me and you're on this page and it's confusing, and what makes it more confusing is whoever copied this drew on it and made big X's and whatnot. I believe this is section 1216, page 332. So you need this bolt right here. See if I can focus in on it. Anyway, long story short, I got the bolt from my intake manifold right here. It is what holds the let me see if I could find it right here. So I took this, which is for the injector cover, just this black bolt that comes out of here. That's the proper size. You want to screw it into the back of the flywheel. This is what I've gathered anyway. And this is the side profile. So here is your mid-plate guide. And then this is the actual mid-plate. So you want to screw it in, then it tells you to screw it in 150 to 200 inches further. So that's not possible. But I believe what they mean is about a half a turn farther. So as you're screwing it in, it's going to be pushing this mid-plate guide. And what you want it to look like is that where it's touching this part right here. Can't get this to focus. I'll show you down here. So what I'm doing is I've already done one. I'm on the second one now. But I've taken that injector bolt and I've put it right in the back of the flywheel. And I am tightening the bolt until I see this gap close up. The gap being right, the light's hard. The part closest to the flywheel, you want that to be touching. So I'm going to tighten it up until that gap is there. And once the gap is stopped, once it touches, then I'm going to give it another half a turn. So I got the transmission up, and I'm trying to line it up. It's not easy. You're going to want to leave the fork not engaged, just flapping around in there while you're doing this. So clutch fork disengaged, and at the end, once you get everything to seat, you have to push it back into its little holder. So the transmission mounting bolts, the space I have between the transmission housing and the engine was too big of a gap. Unfortunately, it didn't slide right on, even though I know I have everything aligned right with the clutch alignment tool. So the transmission mounting bolts, they weren't long enough to fill that gap so I could suck it in by tightening them. So what I did is I used the subframe bolts, and I used that one right there, and those were actually too long. So what I did was I used a socket for a spacer and for a washer, and this is working. So I'm going around and doing subframe bolts just around the transmission housing slowly, and it's sucking in, so it is working. If you do this, you don't want to do it too hard, just because everything's aluminum. You could strip things or crack the housing, so don't be too forceful. So once you're done cinching everything up, you torque the transmission housing bolts to 33 foot-pounds. It's not the most important thing, just make them snug. And here's your clutch release fork, which was just dangling around. And if you look in here, let's see if I can get some light. There's that clip, and all you do is just take this and get it in position and push it in, and that's it. Scratch that again. The housing bolts are all 47 foot-pounds. The mounts themselves, so the rear mounts, those are 76 foot-pounds, and the front mounting bolt, those are 43 foot-pounds. But the actual housing is 47.